They said I was free to go whenever I wished, so long as I paid a debt they never meant to end. England, 1825. The grand entrance hall of Hargrave Manor gleamed under the afternoon light filtering through tall windows, each surface polished to perfection. Eleanor Sutton moved through the corridor with her head bowed, a wooden bucket heavy in her grip. The water sloshed against the sides as she walked, her worn boots making barely a sound against the marble floor. At 26, she had learned to make herself invisible, a shadow among shadows in the house that had become her prison 5 years ago. "You missed a spot near the doorway." Mrs. Pemberley's sharp voice cut through the silence. The gouvernante stood at the top of the stairs, her grey dress immaculate, her expression carved from stone. His lordship expects perfection when the Duke arrives this afternoon. Eleanor nodded without looking up. "Yes, Mrs. Pemberley. And you will remain in the cellar during the visit. We cannot have—" The older woman paused, her lips thinning. "We cannot have you wandering about when there are guests. The cellar." Eleanor's hands tightened around the bucket handle. The small damp room beneath the kitchen where she spent hours locked away whenever Earl Hargrave entertained visitors of importance, where the cold seeped into her bones and the darkness pressed close, where no one could see the daughter of Viscount Sutton reduced to scrubbing floors to pay her dead father's debts. "I understand," Eleanor whispered. Mrs. Pemberley descended 3 steps, her eyes narrowing. "Do you? His lordship has been generous, allowing you to work off what your father owed rather than sending you to debtor's prison. You would do well to remember that." Generous. The word tasted like ash in Eleanor's mouth, but she swallowed it down with all the other words she could never speak. Her father, Viscount Sutton, had died 5 years ago, leaving behind debts that Earl Hargrave had purchased with unseemly haste. Debts that somehow never decreased no matter how many years Eleanor worked, no matter how many hours she spent scrubbing, cleaning, serving. "I will go to the cellar now," Eleanor said quietly. "After you finish the entrance hall. The Duke of North Vale is not a man to be kept waiting, and his lordship wishes to make a favourable impression." The Duke of North Vale. Eleanor had heard the name whispered among the servants. Julian Merrick, a man known for his sharp business sense and his reputation for fairness. She wondered what business brought him to Hargrave Manor, then pushed the thought away. The concerns of dukes and earls had nothing to do with her anymore. She worked quickly, methodically, her hands red and raw from the harsh soap. The entrance hall had to be perfect, every surface gleaming. Through the windows, she could see Thomas, the butler, directing the outdoor staff as they prepared the grounds. Thomas, at least, had kind eyes. He never struck her, never raised his voice. Sometimes he left extra bread in the kitchen when Mrs. Pemberley was not looking. The sound of horses' hooves on gravel drew her attention. Eleanor straightened, casting a quick glance through the window. A magnificent black carriage rolled up the drive, pulled by 4 matched greys. The North Vale crest gleamed on its side, and Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. She needed to disappear before the guest arrived. "Eleanor!" Mrs. Pemberley's voice cracked like a whip. "The cellar, now!" Eleanor abandoned the bucket and hurried through the servants' corridors, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard the front doors opening, heard Earl Hargrave's booming voice welcoming his distinguished guest. She descended the narrow stairs that led to the cellar, each step taking her deeper into the cold darkness below. The cellar door closed behind her with a solid thunk, followed by the scrape of the bolt sliding into place. Eleanor stood in the blackness for a moment, waiting for her eyes to adjust. Thin slivers of light crept through the gaps around the small window high on the wall, barely enough to see by. The space smelled of damp earth and old stone, and in winter, the cold was so fierce she could see her breath. She sank down onto the wooden crate that served as her only seat and wrapped her arms around herself. Above, she could hear the muffled sounds of voices, of footsteps crossing the floor. The Duke and the Earl discussing whatever business brought men of such standing together. Land, perhaps, or investments, things that existed in a world Eleanor no longer belonged to. She closed her eyes and thought of her father. Viscount Sutton had been a kind man, perhaps too kind, generous with his friends, trusting in business. She remembered his library, the smell of leather and pipe tobacco, the way he would read to her in the evenings. He had wanted her to marry well, to be happy. He would weep if he could see her now. Time passed slowly in the darkness. Eleanor had no way to mark it except by the changing angle of the thin light from the window. She tried not to think about the hours stretching ahead, tried not to remember the last time she had been locked here for nearly 2 days when the Earl had hosted a weekend hunting party. Above, a door slammed. Voices rose, though she could not make out words. Then silence fell again, heavy and oppressive. Eleanor shifted on the crate, her body aching from the morning's labour. Her mind drifted to dangerous places, to thoughts of escape that could never be. Where would she go? She had no money, no connections. The Earl had made certain everyone knew she was working to repay her father's debts, a dutiful daughter honouring her family's obligations. No one would help her. No one would question it. The light from the window began to fade as afternoon turned to evening. Eleanor's stomach growled, but she had learned to ignore hunger. Mrs. Pemberley would bring something eventually, though it might be nothing more than stale bread and water. She thought of her father's face, the way he had smiled at her. "You have your mother's strength," he used to say. "Never forget that, Eleanor. You are stronger than you know." But her mother had died when Eleanor was 8, and her father had followed 12 years later, and now she was alone in the dark, locked in a cellar like a criminal. What strength was there in that? A sound drew her attention. A scraping noise near the window. Eleanor stood, her heart racing. Rats, perhaps, or the wind. But then she heard it again, deliberate and careful. Someone was outside the window. She moved closer, standing on the crate to peer through the narrow opening. In the fading light, she could see a shadow moving, and then Mrs. Pemberley's face appeared briefly before vanishing again. Eleanor held her breath, confusion washing over her. Then she noticed it. The window, which was always latched tight from the outside, sat slightly ajar. Not much, just a finger's width, but enough to make her pulse quicken. Had Mrs. Pemberley left it open deliberately? Or was it an accident? Eleanor stared at that gap for a long time as darkness settled fully around her. Above, she could hear the sounds of dinner being served, the clink of crystal, the low murmur of conversation. The Duke was still there, still conducting his business with Earl Hargrave. She pressed her hand against the cold stone wall and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be another day of endless work, of invisible servitude, of a debt that would never be paid. Unless... No, she pushed the thought away. Escape was impossible. Where would she go? What would she do? The Earl would find her, bring her back, and the punishment would be severe. But her eyes kept returning to that window, to the thin line of lesser darkness where it sat unsealed, and deep in her chest, something stirred that she had thought long dead. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps the memory of what hope had once felt like, before 5 years of darkness had buried it beneath layers of exhaustion and despair. The darkness in the cellar seemed to breathe around Eleanor as she lay curled on the thin blanket Mrs. Pemberley had thrown down hours ago. Sleep would not come. Her mind circled endlessly around that window, that small gap of possibility. Above, the house had finally fallen silent. The guests had withdrawn to their chambers, the Earl had retired, and the servants had finished their evening duties. Eleanor rose slowly, her body stiff from the cold. She climbed onto the crate and examined the window more carefully. It was narrow, barely wide enough for her slender frame, but it might be possible. The thought terrified her. 5 years of obedience, of swallowing her pride and accepting her fate, had taught her that resistance only brought pain. But something had shifted inside her during those hours in the dark. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the memory of her father's voice, telling her she was stronger than she knew. Or perhaps it was simply that a person could only endure so much before something broke. And what broke in Eleanor was not her spirit, but her fear. She pressed her hands against the window frame and pushed. It resisted at first, swollen from moisture, but then gave way with a groan that seemed deafening in the silence. Eleanor froze, waiting for footsteps, for voices, for discovery. Nothing came. The opening was just wide enough. She pulled herself up, ignoring the pain in her arms, and squeezed through. The frame scraped against her shoulders and hips, and for one terrible moment, she thought she might become stuck, trapped half in and half out like some grotesque ornament. But then she was through, tumbling onto the damp grass outside. Eleanor lay there for a moment, gasping, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The night air felt impossibly fresh after the stale dampness of the cellar. Stars scattered across the sky above her, more than she had seen in years. When had she last stood beneath open sky after dark? She forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled beneath her, weak from poor food and endless work. The manor loomed behind her, dark except for a single light in the Earl's study. Eleanor turned away from it and began to walk. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond getting away from that cellar, from those walls that had become her entire world. Her bare feet moved across the lawn toward the eastern wing of the manor, the oldest part of the building. The stone was rougher here, the architecture from an earlier century. And there, rising against the stars, was the steep roof of the East Tower. Eleanor stared up at it. A strange calm had settled over her, the kind of peace that comes when all choices have narrowed to one. She found the servants' entrance to the tower, a small door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. It opened with a rusty protest. The stairs inside were narrow and steep, spiraling upward into darkness. Eleanor climbed them slowly, one hand on the wall to steady herself. She counted the steps out of habit, the same way she counted everything now. 42 steps to the first landing, 60 more to the second, and then a final narrow flight that led to a small door. It opened onto the roof. The wind hit her immediately, cold and sharp, pulling at her thin dress and tangled hair. Eleanor stepped out onto the slate tiles, moving carefully toward the edge. The manor's grounds spread below her, gardens and lawns fading into darkness. Beyond that, she could see the lights of distant houses, pinpricks of warmth in the night, other lives being lived, other people who were not locked in cellars and forgotten. She stood at the edge and looked down. It was a long drop, far enough that there would be no recovery, no waking up to find herself still trapped in this nightmare, far enough to finally end the endless cycle of work and hunger and isolation that had become her existence. "I am sorry, Father," she whispered to the wind. "I tried to honor your memory. I tried to be strong, but 5 years had proven too much. 5 years of watching her life drain away in the service of a debt that never decreased, in the hands of a man who saw her as nothing more than property. 5 years of being invisible, of being less than human." Eleanor closed her eyes and felt the wind push against her. One step. That was all it would take. One step, and she would be free. "Stop!" The voice came from behind her, firm and clear. Eleanor's eyes flew open and she spun around, her foot slipping on the slate. For a terrible moment she teetered on the edge, her arms windmilling, and then a strong hand caught her wrist and pulled her back onto solid roof. She found herself staring at a man she had never seen before, tall, with dark hair that the wind whipped around his face and eyes that reflected the starlight. He was dressed in evening clothes, fine wool and silk, and she realized with a jolt that this must be the Duke of North Vale. "Let me go," Eleanor said, trying to pull away, but his grip was firm. "I will not," he replied, "not until you step away from that edge. You have no right. I have every right to prevent someone from throwing their life away." His voice was steady, but not unkind. "Come away from there, please." Eleanor stared at him. Part of her wanted to resist, to fight, to reclaim the one choice she had left. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not pity exactly, something else. Recognition, perhaps, as if he saw her not as a servant or a debtor, but as a person. She let him guide her away from the edge, her legs suddenly weak. They sat down together on the slate tiles, the Duke keeping a careful distance, but positioning himself between her and the drop. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eleanor." Her voice came out hoarse. "Eleanor Sutton." She saw something shift in his expression. "Sutton. The Viscount's daughter?" I was. Bitterness crept into her voice. Now I am nothing. A servant working to repay debts that will never be satisfied. Tell me, he said simply. And so she did. Perhaps it was the darkness, or the exhaustion, or the fact that she had nothing left to lose. She told him about her father's death, about the Earl purchasing the debts, about 5 years of servitude that had stripped away everything she once was. She told him about the cellar, about being locked away like something shameful whenever guests arrived. The Duke listened without interrupting. When she finished, silence stretched between them for a long moment. "What is your name?" Eleanor asked finally. It seemed absurd that she had shared her darkest truths with someone whose name she did not even know. "Julian Merrick, Duke of North Vale." He paused. "I came to Hargrave Manor today to discuss a land transaction, but I found myself uneasy. Something about the house felt wrong. Everything about that house is wrong," Eleanor said quietly. "I could not sleep," Julian continued. "So I walked in the gardens, and I saw you climb through that window. I followed because I was curious and then concerned." His eyes met hers. "I'm glad I did." Eleanor looked away. "You should not have stopped me. You should have let me finish what I came here to do." "No," the word was firm. "Whatever debts you think you owe, whatever burden you carry, your life is worth more than that. Your father would not want this for you." Tears stung Eleanor's eyes at the mention of her father. "My father is dead, and I am so tired. Every day is the same. There is no end to it, no hope of anything better. I am 26 years old, and my life is over. Your life is not over." Julian's voice softened. "Not if you choose to fight for it." "Fight?" Eleanor laughed, the sound bitter. "Against an earl, against the weight of legal debts. I have no money, no connections, no power. What fight could I possibly make? You are not alone in this." Julian stood and offered her his hand. "Come with me, away from this roof, away from this darkness. Let me help you." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand. Every instinct screamed not to trust him. He was a nobleman, a duke, a man who existed in the same world as Earl Hargrave. Why would he help her? What could he possibly gain? But as she sat there on the cold slate tiles, the wind biting through her thin dress, she realized she had two choices. She could refuse his help and wait for another opportunity to finish what she had started. Or she could take his hand and see if there was any truth to his words, if there was any possibility of escape that did not require her death. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "You are stronger than you know." Eleanor reached up and placed her hand in his. Julian's grip was warm and steady as he helped her to her feet. Her legs threatened to give way, and he caught her elbow to steady her. "When did you last eat?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "This morning. Bread and water." Eleanor swayed slightly. "I am fine." "You are not fine." Julian guided her toward the tower door. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She forced herself to move, one foot in front of the other. "But where are we going? If the Earl discovers I left the cellar, the Earl will discover nothing. Not tonight." Julian's jaw tightened. "There is an inn 1/2 mile down the road. I will take you there, and we will determine what comes next." "An inn?" Eleanor stopped, pulling back. "I cannot. My reputation—" "Your reputation?" Julian turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, your reputation is the least of your concerns right now. You were locked in a cellar. You were prepared to end your life rather than face another day in that house. Do you truly care what gossips might say?" He was right, of course. What did reputation matter when she had nothing left? But years of training, of being reminded of proper behavior and social expectations, were hard to shake even now. "I have no money for an inn," she said instead. "I have money." Julian's voice gentled. "Please, Eleanor, let me help you. One step at a time. First, we get you somewhere safe and warm. Then we determine what must be done about Hargrave and these debts of yours." Eleanor looked back at the manor, dark and menacing against the sky. Somewhere in there, the Earl slept, confident that his prisoner remained locked in the cellar where he had put her. Somewhere in there, Mrs. Pembley and Thomas went about their duties, maintaining the fiction that everything was as it should be. She thought of her father, of his kindness and his trust, and how it had destroyed them both in the end. She thought of 5 years lost, of the woman she had been, and the shadow she had become, and she thought of that moment on the edge, of how close she had come to stepping off into nothing. One step at a time, she repeated quietly. Julian smiled, the first real warmth she had seen in his expression. One step at a time. They descended the tower stairs together, Julian's hand firm on her elbow to steady her. Eleanor's heart pounded with each step, expecting at any moment to hear voices, to be discovered, to be dragged back to the cellar. But the manor remained silent around them. At the bottom, Julian paused. "Wait here a moment." He disappeared through a doorway and returned shortly with a cloak, which he draped over her shoulders. It was far too large, made for a man, but it was warm and it covered her servant's dress. They slipped out through the servant's entrance and into the night. The grass was wet with dew beneath Eleanor's bare feet, and she stumbled more than once, but Julian kept her steady. They moved quickly across the grounds, keeping to the shadows, until they reached the road. "Not much farther," Julian said quietly. "Can you continue?" Eleanor nodded, though her legs shook with exhaustion. But with each step away from Hargrave Manor, she felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of something that might one day become hope, if she was brave enough to reach for it. The inn was a modest establishment, its windows glowing warmly in the pre-dawn darkness. Julian guided Eleanor through a side entrance, and she was grateful he did not take her through the main room where curious eyes might see the bedraggled woman in a servant's dress and borrowed cloak. He spoke briefly with the innkeeper, a middle-aged woman whose expression shifted from suspicion to concern when she saw Eleanor's condition. "The room at the end of the hall," the innkeeper said quietly, handing Julian a key. "I will bring hot water and food." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. Eleanor stood in the centre, unsure what to do with herself now that the immediate danger had passed. Her body trembled, whether from cold or shock or exhaustion she could not say. "Sit," Julian said gently, guiding her to the bed. "The innkeeper will bring food shortly." Eleanor sank onto the mattress, softer than anything she had felt in 5 years. She pulled the cloak tighter around herself and stared at the floor. Reality was beginning to settle over her like a weight. She had escaped. She was away from Hargrave Manor. But what came next? "I need to send for someone," Julian said, breaking the silence. "A physician and a friend who can help us." "No physician," Eleanor said quickly. "I am not ill." "You are malnourished and exhausted. You nearly collapsed twice on the walk here." His voice was firm but not unkind. "You need medical attention." Before Eleanor could argue further, a knock sounded at the door. The innkeeper entered with a tray bearing bread, cheese, cold meat, and a pot of tea. Behind her came a young boy carrying a basin of steaming water. They set everything down quickly and departed without questions, though the innkeeper's eyes lingered on Eleanor with sympathy. "Eat," Julian said, pouring tea into a cup and pressing it into Eleanor's hands. She sipped it slowly, the warmth spreading through her. The food sat on the tray before her, more than she had seen in months, and her stomach cramped with hunger. But years of deprivation had taught her that eating too much too quickly led to illness. She took small bites of bread, forcing herself to go slowly. Julian watched her for a moment, then moved to the door. "I must send messages. Will you be all right here for a short time?" Eleanor nodded, unable to speak around the food in her mouth. When he left, she set down the bread and moved to the washstand. The water was still hot, and she dampened a cloth to wash her face and hands. The simple act of being clean brought tears to her eyes. Julian returned perhaps 20 minutes later, accompanied by an older man carrying a leather bag. "This is Dr. Whitmore," Julian said. "He is discreet and trustworthy." Dr. Whitmore was perhaps 60, with silver hair and keen eyes behind spectacles. He set his bag down and regarded Eleanor with professional assessment. "May I examine you, miss?" Eleanor wanted to refuse, but exhaustion had stripped away her ability to resist. She nodded mutely. The examination was thorough, but respectful. Dr. Whitmore checked her pulse, listened to her breathing, examined her hands and wrists. He asked quiet questions about her diet, her living conditions, how long she'd been confined. Julian stood by the window, his back turned to give her privacy. But she could see the tension in his shoulders as she answered. Severe malnutrition, Dr. Whitmore said finally. Bruising consistent with manual labor and possible restraint. Exhaustion, both physical and mental. He turned to Julian. This young woman needs rest, proper food, and time to recover. I will leave some tonic to help her sleep and restore her strength. She will have everything she needs, Julian said quietly. After Dr. Whitmore departed, Julian pulled a chair close to the bed where Eleanor sat. I have sent word to Lady Hartfield. She is my late mother's cousin, a woman of impeccable reputation. She lives near here and will provide you with proper shelter and protection. Why are you helping me? The question burst from Eleanor before she could stop it. You do not know me. This is not your concern. Julian was quiet for a long moment. My mother died when I was 15. An illness that took her slowly, painfully. My father was distant in his grief. I know what it is to feel helpless, to watch suffering and be unable to prevent it. He met her eyes. I may not have been able to save my mother, but I can help you, and I will not stand by while injustice is done if I have the power to prevent it. The Earl will come looking for me, Eleanor said. When he discovers I'm gone, let him come. Julian's voice hardened. While you were eating, I spoke with the innkeeper's husband. He used to work at Hargrave Manor years ago. He told me things, Eleanor, about servants who disappeared, about debts that were manipulated. You are not the first person Hargrave has exploited, though you may be the first of noble birth. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. I suspected. There was a girl, Mary, who worked in the kitchens when I first arrived. She vanished one day and no one spoke of her again. Thomas, the butler, does he seem sympathetic to you? Eleanor looked up in surprise. Thomas? He is kind, in small ways. He leaves extra food sometimes, but he would never speak against the Earl. Perhaps. Julian stood and paced to the window. But fear makes people do many things. If Thomas knows the truth about what happens in that house, he may be convinced to speak of it, especially if he believes there will be protection for doing so. You cannot fight an Earl. Eleanor's voice was flat. He has power, connections. Whatever you think you can do. I am a duke, Julian interrupted quietly. My rank is higher than Hargrave's. My reputation is solid while his is questionable. And if what I suspect is true, if he has indeed been falsifying debts and exploiting vulnerable people, then he has committed crimes that even his title cannot protect him from. He turned back to face her. But I need proof. I need witnesses. I need the truth brought into the light. I can tell you what he did to me. Your testimony will be important, but it cannot be the only evidence. I have already sent word to my brother, Quinton. He is a lawyer in London. He will search the records for the original documents of your father's debts. If Hargrave has falsified anything, Quinton will find it. Eleanor felt dizzy with the speed of events. Hours ago she had been locked in a cellar, prepared to end her life. Now she sat in an inn room, while a duke made plans to bring down an earl on her behalf. It seemed impossible, like something from a story rather than real life. I am frightened, she whispered. Julian crossed the room and knelt beside the bed so their eyes were level. You have every right to be frightened. What I am proposing is not without risk. But Eleanor, you cannot go back to that house. Even if you wanted to, I would not allow it. The question is not whether to fight, but how. Why do you believe me? Eleanor asked. You have only my word against an earl's. I believe you because I saw you on that roof. I saw what desperation looks like, what abuse creates. His voice softened. And I believe you because when I look at Hargrave, I see a man who wears cruelty like a mask of respectability. I have met men like him before. They think their titles give them the right to destroy others without consequence. A knock at the door interrupted them. Julian rose and opened it to reveal a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed despite the early hour. She had grey-streaked brown hair and eyes that were both sharp and kind. Julian, she said, embracing him briefly before turning her attention to Eleanor. "And you must be Miss Sutton. I am Lady Hartfield. Julian sent word that you require assistance." Eleanor tried to stand to curtsy, but Lady Hartfield waved her back down. "None of that, child. You have been through quite enough without worrying about formalities." She turned to Julian. "I have prepared a room at my home. The carriage is waiting outside." "Lady Hartfield was my mother's confidant," Julian said to Eleanor. "You will be safe with her and properly chaperoned." "I do not understand why you are all doing this," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "I am no one. I have nothing to offer in return." Lady Hartfield sat beside her and took her hand. "My dear girl, you are a viscount's daughter who has been grievously wronged. That is more than enough reason to help you." Her voice gentled. "But beyond that, you are a young woman in desperate need. No payment or return is required for simple human decency." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, and she could not stop them. 5 years of holding everything inside, of being strong because she had no choice, finally broke. Lady Hartfield held her while she wept, making soothing sounds, and Julian discreetly turned away to give them privacy. When Eleanor finally regained control of herself, she felt hollow, but strangely lighter. Lady Hartfield produced a handkerchief and helped her dry her face. "There now," Lady Hartfield said. "Julian, you should return to Hargrave Manor and maintain appearances. We do not want Hargrave to suspect anything yet." "Agreed." Julian moved toward the door, then paused. "Eleanor, I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to see justice done, but you must promise me something in return." "What?" Eleanor asked. "Promise me you will not give up. Promise me you will fight for yourself, for the life you deserve to have." Eleanor thought of her father, of the woman she had been before Hargrave Manor stole everything from her. She thought of 5 years lost, but also of all the years ahead that might still be reclaimed. "I promise," she whispered. Julian nodded, satisfied. "Lady Hartfield will keep you safe. I will send word as soon as I have news from Quinton." After he left, Lady Hartfield helped Eleanor into the waiting carriage. The sky was beginning to lighten with the approaching dawn, and Eleanor watched through the window as the inn fell away behind them. She was leaving behind the only world she had known for 5 years, moving toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. Lady Hartfield's home was a gracious country house surrounded by gardens. A maid met them at the door, and Lady Hartfield gave quiet instructions. Eleanor was led to a bedroom that seemed impossibly luxurious after the cellar, with a proper bed and clean linens and windows that opened onto morning sunlight. "Rest now," Lady Hartfield said gently. "You are safe here. No one will hurt you. When you wake, we will talk more about what comes next." Eleanor lay down on the soft bed, and sleep claimed her almost immediately. Her last conscious thought was of Julian's words. "You will fight for yourself, for the life you deserve to have." Perhaps, she thought, as darkness took her. Perhaps there was still a life worth fighting for after all. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through gauze curtains, disoriented and confused. For a moment, she thought she was still in the cellar, and the light was a dream. But then memory returned. The roof, Julian, Lady Hartfield, escape. She sat up slowly, her body aching but less desperately than before. A glance at the window showed the sun high in the sky. She had slept most of the day away. On the chair beside her bed lay a dress, simple but clean and well made, in a soft blue that reminded her of dresses she had owned before her father died. A knock at the door preceded a young maid entering with a tray. "Lady Hartfield asked me to bring you some broth and bread, miss. She said to start with simple foods until your stomach adjusts." Eleanor accepted the tray gratefully. The maid helped her wash and dress, treating her with gentle respect that brought tears to her eyes. When had she last been treated as a person, rather than property? Lady Hartfield found her in the sitting room an hour later, staring out the window at gardens she could barely comprehend. Freedom felt strange, like a language she had forgotten how to speak. "How do you feel?" Lady Hartfield asked, settling into a chair nearby. "Strange," Eleanor admitted. I keep expecting someone to tell me I must return to work, or that I am not permitted to be in this room. You are permitted to be anywhere in this house you wish. You are my guest, Eleanor, not a servant. Lady Hartfield poured tea from a pot that had been brought in. Julian sent word this morning. His brother Quinton has the documents and is travelling from London. He should arrive tomorrow. What did the Duke tell the Earl? Eleanor's hands trembled slightly around her teacup. About my disappearance. Julian returned to the manor this morning and expressed surprise that you were missing. He suggested you might have run away during the night. The Earl was quite agitated, apparently. But there is nothing he can do without admitting he was keeping you locked in a cellar, which would raise questions he cannot afford to answer. Eleanor absorbed this. So, he must pretend I simply left. Precisely. And while he searches for you through unofficial channels, Julian searches for evidence through official ones. Lady Hartfield regarded her thoughtfully. Julian told me what you endured, what you attempted on that roof. I want you to know that you are safe here for as long as you need. No one will force you to do anything you do not wish to do. Lady Hartfield, I have no money. I cannot repay your hospitality. Eleanor, the older woman's voice was firm but kind. You are a viscount's daughter who has been grievously wronged. Helping you is not a transaction. It is simply what one does when faced with injustice. She paused. Julian also mentioned that you wish to help actively in building a case against Hargrave. Is that still true? Eleanor set down her teacup. Yes. I cannot simply hide here while others fight my battles. If there is anything I can provide, any information that might help. Good. Then we shall prepare. Lady Hartfield stood and moved to a writing desk. I want you to write down everything you remember. Every detail of your confinement. Every instance of abuse. Every conversation that might prove relevant. Names of other servants who witnessed what happened. Any documents you might have seen regarding your father's debts. I can do that, Eleanor said, feeling purpose stir within her for the first time in years. She spent the afternoon writing, her hand cramping as memories poured onto paper. The day she had arrived at Hargrave Manor, still grieving her father, believing she would work for perhaps a year to clear his debts. The first time she had been locked in the cellar. The gradual realization that the debt never decreased, no matter how hard she worked. Mrs. Pemberley's cold efficiency, Thomas's small kindnesses, the girl Mary who had disappeared. Writing it all down forced Eleanor to confront details she had tried to bury. The way the Earl would inspect her work and find fault no matter how perfectly she completed tasks. The times he had threatened to have her arrested if she tried to leave. The growing understanding that he enjoyed having power over someone of noble birth. That her suffering fed something dark in him. By the time she finished, the sun was setting and her hands were ink-stained. Lady Hartfield read through the pages carefully, her expression growing grimmer with each line. This is good, Eleanor. Detailed. Specific. She set the papers aside. Tomorrow when Quinton arrives, he will need to review this. But for now, you should rest. You have done enough for today. That evening, Eleanor sat in the drawing room with Lady Hartfield, learning to be idle in a way she had forgotten. The older woman spoke of her own life, of her late husband, of the years she had spent helping Julian's mother navigate society. She treated Eleanor not as a victim to be pitied, but as an equal, and that simple dignity meant more than Eleanor could express. Julian arrived the following morning with Quinton. Eleanor had been awake for hours, too nervous to sleep. She stood as they entered the drawing room, smoothing her borrowed dress. Quinton Merrick was 28, with the same dark hair as his brother, but warmer eyes. He bowed to her respectfully. Miss Sutton, I am honoured to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Thank you for your help, Eleanor said quietly. Let us sit and discuss what I have found. Quinton opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several documents. Miss Sutton, your father did owe money when he died. Approximately £300, a significant sum but not insurmountable. The debts were legitimate, owed to several creditors. Eleanor nodded. She had known her father struggled financially in his final years. However, Quinton continued, his voice hardening, Earl Hargrave purchased those debts from the original creditors for less than their face value, which is legal. What is not legal is what he did afterward. He altered the documents to show a debt of £700 rather than £300. And he added interest clauses that were never part of the original agreements. The room fell silent. Eleanor stared at the documents Quentin laid before her, seeing her father's signature alongside falsified numbers. "Are you certain?" Julian asked, though his tone suggested he had expected this. "Completely. I have the original documents from the creditors. They do not match what Hargrave claimed. He's been keeping Miss Sutton in servitude based on fraudulent debt." Quentin turned to Eleanor. "You should have been free to leave 3 years ago. The work you have done since then more than satisfied the legitimate debt." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. 3 years. She had lost 3 additional years of her life to a lie. "Can we prove this in court?" Lady Hartfield asked. "Yes, the evidence is solid, but we need more than just the financial fraud. We need testimony about the conditions of Miss Sutton's confinement, about any other victims." Quentin looked at Eleanor. "Lady Hartfield shared your written account with me this morning. It is compelling, but the courts will want corroboration." "Thomas," Eleanor said. "The butler. He has been there for years. He must know about the others who came before me." "Would he testify?" Julian asked. "I do not know. He is afraid of the Earl, but he is not cruel. Perhaps if he knew he would be protected." Eleanor trailed off, uncertain. "I will speak with him," Julian said firmly. "If I can convince him that giving testimony will not result in punishment, he may cooperate. Men like Hargrave maintain power through fear. Once that fear is broken, the truth often follows." "There is something else," Quentin said. "I made inquiries in the village near Hargrave Manor. There were 2 servants who worked there before you, Miss Sutton. Both young women. One supposedly ran away in the night. The other died, officially from a fall down the stairs." "Mary," Eleanor whispered. "And before her, there was another girl. I only heard whispers about her. If we can locate the families of these women, if they will speak about what they know or suspect, it strengthens our case considerably." Quentin gathered his papers. "But I must warn you all, this will not be quick or easy. Hargrave is an earl. He has connections, resources. Taking him down will require absolute certainty in our evidence and careful management of how we present our case." "How long?" Eleanor asked. "Weeks, perhaps months. We must be thorough." Eleanor felt something crumble inside her. She had hoped for swift justice, for immediate resolution. But she forced herself to nod. "Then we must be patient." Julian moved to stand beside her chair. "Eleanor, I know this is not what you wish to hear, but we will succeed. Hargrave will face consequences for what he has done. What if he finds me before then? What if he will not?" Julian's voice was absolute. "I have positioned men to watch the roads leading here. If Hargrave makes any move toward you, I will know immediately. And if he is foolish enough to try, he will only provide us with more evidence of his guilt." Over the following days, Eleanor settled into an uneasy routine at Lady Hartfield's home. She continued to write down every detail she could remember, answering Quentin's careful questions. Julian visited frequently, bringing news of his investigation. He had approached Thomas the butler and found the man torn between fear and conscience. Thomas had not yet agreed to testify, but he had not refused either. He had, however, confirmed that there were others before Eleanor who had suffered under Hargrave's cruelty. Eleanor found herself drawn to Julian in ways she had not expected. His dedication to her case went beyond obligation. He listened to her, asked her opinions, treated her as an equal. When she spoke of her father, Julian shared memories of his own mother, and she saw the grief he still carried. One afternoon, they walked in Lady Hartfield's gardens together. Eleanor was slowly regaining strength, her body recovering from years of poor nutrition. "You have given up so much time to help me," Eleanor said. "Your business, your responsibilities." "Nothing is more important than seeing justice done," Julian replied. "And Eleanor, helping you is not a burden. It is—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "It is important to me. You are important to me." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "You barely know me. I know that you survived 5 years of abuse that would have broken most people. I know that even in your darkest moment, you had strength enough to accept help when it was offered. I know that you are fighting now, not just for yourself, but for the others Hargrave hurt. Julian stopped walking and turned to face her. I know enough, Eleanor. She looked away, overwhelmed. I do not know who I am anymore. The girl I was before my father died, she is gone. And the woman I became at Hargrave Manor, I do not wish to be her either. I feel lost. Then we will find who you are meant to be. Together, if you will allow it. Julian's voice was gentle. One step at a time, remember. Eleanor met his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. Not pity, not duty. Something warmer, something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. One step at a time, she agreed softly. That evening, Quentin arrived with news that shifted everything. He had located the family of Mary, the girl who had supposedly fallen down the stairs. Her mother was willing to speak, and what she had to say would change the nature of their case entirely. Mary's death was no accident, Quentin said grimly. Her mother has letters Mary sent before she died, speaking of her fear of the Earl. And there is a witness, another servant who saw what truly happened that night. Julian's expression hardened. Then we move forward. No more waiting. I want Thomas brought here under protection. I want every piece of evidence gathered, and I want Hargrave to know that his crimes are about to be exposed. Eleanor felt fear and hope war within her chest. The fight was truly beginning, and there would be no turning back now. The following week brought a flurry of activity that left Eleanor both exhausted and exhilarated. Thomas arrived at Lady Hartfield's home under cover of darkness, brought by Julian's men, and visibly terrified. Eleanor met him in the drawing room, and the butler's eyes filled with tears when he saw her. "Miss Sutton," he said, his voice breaking, "I am so sorry. I should have done something, said something years ago." "You are here now," Eleanor replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. That is what matters. Thomas's testimony proved damning. He had worked at Hargrave Manor for 15 years and had witnessed the Earl's cruelty towards servants escalate over time. He confirmed that Mary had not fallen down the stairs, but had been pushed during an argument with the Earl. He spoke of another girl before Eleanor, a farmer's daughter named Alice, who had disappeared entirely after threatening to report Hargrave's abuse to the magistrate. The Earl paid the magistrate to look the other way, Thomas said, shame thick in his voice. And he paid Alice's family to stay silent about her disappearance. I heard him boasting about it to Mrs. Pembley once, saying that everyone has a price. Quentin wrote everything down meticulously, asking careful questions to establish timeline and details. Julian paced the room like a caged animal, his anger barely contained. "We have enough," Quentin said finally. The falsified debts, Eleanor's testimony, Thomas's account, and Mary's mother's letters. This is sufficient to bring before the House of Lords. "Not yet," Julian said sharply. Everyone turned to look at him. Hargrave still has influence. If we move too quickly, he will use his connections to muddy the waters, to cast doubt on our witnesses. We need something more, something that will make his allies abandon him before we even enter that chamber. "What do you suggest?" Lady Hartfield asked. Julian stopped pacing. "We expose him socially first, carefully, subtly, plant seeds of doubt among his peers, make them question his character before we ever present formal charges. By the time this reaches the House of Lords, Hargrave should have no friends left to defend him." "That could take weeks," Eleanor protested. "And what if he discovers what we are doing? What if he flees?" "He will not flee. Men like Hargrave never believe they can truly be brought down. His arrogance is his weakness." Julian's eyes met hers. "I know you want this finished quickly, Eleanor. But if we are hasty, we risk him escaping justice entirely. Can you trust me in this?" Eleanor thought of the 5 years she had already lost, of the impatience burning in her chest. But she also thought of Mary, of Alice, of all the others who had suffered. If taking more time meant ensuring Hargrave truly paid for his crimes, then she would wait. "I trust you," she said. Julian's expression softened. "Thank you." The campaign began that very week. Julian attended social gatherings in London, always among the highest circles where Hargrave's name carried weight. He never directly accused the Earl of wrongdoing, but he asked careful questions. Had anyone noticed how frequently Hargrave's servants left his employ? Were those financial dealings of his truly as sound as they appeared? Such a shame about that girl who died at his manor last year. Tragic accident that was. Each question, each subtle doubt, spread like ripples in a pond. Julian reported back to Lady Hartfield's home every few days, and Eleanor listened to his progress with growing amazement. He was methodical, strategic, turning Hargrave's own social world against him, without the Earl even realizing what was happening. But Hargrave was not entirely blind. Word reached them through Julian's network that the Earl was asking questions of his own, seeking information about Eleanor's whereabouts. He had hired men to search for her, offering substantial rewards for information. "He grows desperate," Julian said during one evening meeting. "That is good. Desperate men make mistakes. Or they become more dangerous," Eleanor countered. She sat by the window, watching the gardens as twilight fell. "What if he finds this place? What if he threatens Lady Hartfield?" "I have stationed guards on the grounds," Julian assured her. "No one approaches this house without my knowledge." "You cannot protect everyone forever," Eleanor said quietly. "The longer this continues, the more people are put at risk for my sake." Julian crossed the room to stand beside her. "This is not just for your sake anymore, Eleanor. This is about preventing Hargrave from hurting anyone else, about ensuring men like him understand they cannot hide behind their titles while committing crimes." Eleanor turned to face him. Over the past weeks, she had grown increasingly aware of how often her thoughts turned to Julian. The way he listened when she spoke, the intensity of his focus when planning their next move, the rare smiles he offered that transformed his serious features into something almost boyish. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked. "Truly, there must be dozens of injustices you could address. Why invest so much in this particular fight?" Julian was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember what I told you that first night? About my mother's death? You said you felt helpless watching her suffer. My father became distant after she died. Cold. He threw himself into managing his estates, into politics, into anything that would distract him from grief. And Julian's voice roughened. "I was 15 years old, and I had no way to process what I was feeling. So I made a promise to myself that I would never again stand by while someone suffered if I had the power to help, that I would use whatever resources and influence I possessed to prevent the kind of pain I witnessed. That is a heavy burden to carry," Eleanor said softly. "Perhaps, but it gives my privilege purpose." Julian met her eyes. "And Eleanor, helping you has become about more than that promise. You have become important to me in ways I did not anticipate." Eleanor's breath caught. The air between them seemed to shift, to thicken with unspoken words. She was intensely aware of how close he stood, of the way the dying light caught in his dark hair. "I do not know what I can offer you," she whispered. "I am still broken in so many ways, still healing." "You are not broken. You are healing, yes, but you are also strong and brave and—" Julian stopped himself, seeming to realize he had said too much. "Forgive me. You have enough to worry about without me burdening you with my feelings." "It is not a burden." Eleanor surprised herself with the words. "Julian, you have given me back my life. You have shown me that I am worth fighting for. How could your feelings be anything but a gift?" Julian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His touch was warm, steady, and Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen at the contact. "When this is over," he said quietly, "when Hargrave has been dealt with, and you have had time to heal fully, to discover who you wish to be without fear hanging over you, I would very much like to know you better, if you would allow it." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I would like that as well." They stood together, as darkness fell completely outside, neither speaking, both aware that something had shifted between them. It was not the passionate declaration of romantic novels. It was quieter than that, more solid, a foundation being laid for something that might grow when the time was right. The moment was interrupted by Quinton's arrival. He entered the drawing room with unusual energy, a document clutched in his hand. "We have it," he announced. The final piece we needed. Julian reluctantly released Eleanor's hand and turned to his brother. What have you found? Lady Vivian Hargrave, Quinton said, spreading the document on the table. The Earl's wife. She has been living in Bath for the past 3 years, essentially separated from her husband. I took the liberty of contacting her through a mutual acquaintance, and she has agreed to meet with us. Why would she help? Lady Hartfield asked, skepticism evident in her tone. Because she has her own grievances against Hargrave. Their marriage was arranged, and by all accounts he has treated her abominably. She has no love for him, and every reason to want free of his control. If she testifies to his character, to his cruelty even towards someone of her station, it will destroy any remaining sympathy he might garner from his peers. Julian's eyes gleamed. When can we meet with her? She arrives in London tomorrow. She has requested a private meeting at the home of our mutual acquaintance, someone above reproach who can vouch for the propriety of such a gathering. Quinton looked at Eleanor. She specifically asked if you would be present, Miss Sutton. She wishes to hear your story directly from you. Eleanor felt nervousness flutter in her stomach. Of course, if it will help. There is risk in you travelling to London, Julian said immediately. Hargrave has men searching for you. Then we will be careful, Eleanor replied. But I am not hiding forever, Julian. If Lady Vivian needs to meet me to feel comfortable giving testimony, then I will meet her. Lady Hartfield stood. I will accompany you, of course. We shall make it a proper outing, beyond suspicion. The journey to London was arranged carefully. Eleanor wore a veil and travelled in Lady Hartfield's carriage, with Julian and Quinton riding ahead to ensure no one suspicious followed. They arrived at a townhouse in Mayfair belonging to a Lady Rothwell, a widow of impeccable reputation, who had agreed to host their meeting. Lady Vivian Hargrave proved to be a woman in her late 30s, handsome rather than beautiful, with intelligent grey eyes and a mouth set in a firm line. She studied Eleanor carefully when they were introduced. You are very young, Lady Vivian said, and you truly worked as a servant in my husband's house for 5 years. Yes, my lady, Eleanor replied. From the time I was 21 until I escaped several weeks ago. Escaped? Lady Vivian's mouth twisted. An interesting choice of word for leaving one's place of employment. She sat down and gestured for the others to do the same. I want the truth, Miss Sutton. All of it. I have heard rumours, accusations, but I must know exactly what my husband did before I decide whether to involve myself in this matter. Eleanor took a breath and began to speak. She told Lady Vivian everything, from her father's death to the falsified debts, from the cellar to the roof where Julian had found her. She spoke of Mary and Alice, of Thomas's testimony, of 5 years stolen from her life. When she finished, silence filled the room. Lady Vivian's expression had grown progressively harder throughout the account, and now she stood abruptly and walked to the window. I knew Vincent was cruel, she said finally. I knew he had a vicious temper and took pleasure in exerting power over those weaker than himself. But this is beyond even what I imagined. She turned back to face them. He tried to have me declared mad once, did you know? 7 years ago, when I first attempted to leave him. He told our friends I was suffering from nervous hysteria. If not for my brother's intervention, I might have been locked away in an asylum. I am sorry, Eleanor said quietly. Do not apologize for him. Lady Vivian's voice was sharp. I will testify. I will tell the House of Lords exactly what kind of man Vincent Hargrave is, and I will make certain that every person of influence in London knows the truth before he ever steps foot in that chamber. Julian stood and bowed to her. Thank you, Lady Vivian. Your courage in this matter will not be forgotten. Courage? Lady Vivian laughed bitterly. No, Your Grace, this is not courage. This is simply a woman who has been silent too long, finally finding her voice. They spoke for another hour, Quinton carefully documenting everything Lady Vivian could tell them about Hargrave's character and history. By the time they prepared to leave, Eleanor felt something close to hope stirring in her chest. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, very soon, Hargrave would face justice for everything he had done. The attack came 3 nights after their return from London. Eleanor had been sleeping fitfully. her dreams filled with shadowy figures and locked doors. She woke to the sound of breaking glass somewhere below, followed by shouts. Her heart lurched into her throat as she scrambled from bed, pulling a robe around herself. Lady Hartfield burst into the room, her face pale in the candlelight. "Come quickly. We must get you to the safe room." "What is happening?" "Men at the gates. They have overwhelmed the guards." Lady Hartfield grasped Eleanor's arm and pulled her into the hallway. Below, Eleanor could hear more crashes, the sound of furniture being overturned. Fear flooded through her, the same paralyzing terror she had felt in Hargrave's cellar. But beneath it, something else stirred. Anger. She had escaped once. She had found allies, built a case, discovered her own strength. She would not be dragged back into darkness now. "Where is Julian?" Eleanor demanded, as they hurried down a servants' corridor. "On his way. I sent word the moment the alarm was raised." Lady Hartfield opened a concealed door in the panelling and thrust Eleanor inside. "Stay here. Do not come out until I or Julian comes for you." The hidden room was small and dark, barely large enough to stand in. Eleanor pressed her ear to the door, listening to footsteps thundering through the house, to men's voices shouting orders. Hargrave's men. They had found her. Time stretched endlessly. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms. She thought of her father, of the promise she had made to Julian to keep fighting. She thought of Mary and Alice and all the others who had not survived Hargrave's cruelty. She would not join them. She would not let him win. The sounds of struggle eventually faded. Eleanor heard new voices, Julian's among them, commanding and authoritative. Then footsteps approached her hiding place, and the door opened to reveal Julian, his face grim and his coat torn at the shoulder. "Eleanor," relief flooded his expression. "Thank God you are safe." She stumbled out of the cramped space and into the hallway. "What happened? Did they—" "My men arrived in time. Hargrave sent 6 men to take you, but they have been subdued. 3 are injured but alive. The others fled when reinforcements came." Julian's hands gripped her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. "Are you hurt?" "No. Lady Hartfield got me to safety before they reached this floor." Eleanor's voice shook despite her best efforts to steady it. "Where is she? Is she—" "I am here, child." Lady Hartfield appeared behind Julian, looking dishevelled but unharmed. A bit shaken, but nothing more serious than that. Eleanor felt her legs weaken with relief, and Julian steadied her. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry I brought this danger to your home." "Nonsense." Lady Hartfield's voice was firm. "Hargrave brought this danger. You are the victim here, Eleanor. Do not forget that." "She is right," Julian said. "And this attack may have been the Earl's greatest mistake. He has now committed assault and attempted kidnapping in front of multiple witnesses. That alone is grounds for immediate arrest." "Will it be enough?" Eleanor asked. "He is still an Earl. He can still claim this was a misunderstanding, that he was simply trying to recover his servant. No court will accept that defense, not with the evidence we have already compiled." Quinton emerged from a side room, his expression fierce despite his usual calm demeanour. "This was a criminal act, witnessed by respectable people. The moment we present this to the authorities alongside the rest of our case, Hargrave is finished." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but fear still clawed at her chest. What if he tries again? What if next time? "There will be no next time," Julian interrupted. "You are coming to North Vale, my estate in Yorkshire. It is remote, heavily staffed, and far more defensible than anywhere near London. Hargrave will not reach you there." "Yorkshire is days away," Eleanor protested, "which is precisely why you will be safe there. We leave at first light." Julian's tone left no room for argument. "Lady Hartfield, you should come as well. I will not risk Hargrave retaliating against you for sheltering Eleanor." "I accept your invitation gratefully," Lady Hartfield said, "though I suspect Vincent Hargrave is too concerned with his own neck now to spare thoughts for revenge against me." They departed for Yorkshire the next morning in a convoy of 3 carriages surrounded by armed men. Eleanor watched through the window as Lady Hartfield's home disappeared behind them, feeling unmoored. Every time she thought she had found solid ground, it shifted beneath her feet. Julian rode in the carriage with Eleanor and Lady Hartfield for most of the journey. his presence solid and reassuring. They spoke little, but his hand found hers at some point during the long miles, and Eleanor held on gratefully. North Vale Estate revealed itself on the third day of travel, rising from the Yorkshire countryside like something from a dream. It was massive, built of grey stone that caught the afternoon light, surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests. Eleanor stared at it through the carriage window, overwhelmed. "This is your home?" she asked Julian. "One of them, but my favourite." He smiled slightly. "I grew up here. My mother loved these hills." They were greeted by her efficient staff, who asked no questions about the armed escort or the sudden arrival of guests. Eleanor was shown to a bedroom that was larger than the entire servants' quarters at Hargrave Manor, with windows overlooking gardens that seemed to stretch forever. That evening, they gathered in Julian's study. Quinton had ridden ahead and already begun setting up a makeshift office, documents spread across every surface. "We move forward immediately," Julian said, pouring wine for everyone. "Quinton, I want charges filed first thing tomorrow. Falsification of debts, unlawful imprisonment, assault, attempted kidnapping, everything. The attack gives us leverage we did not have before." Quinton agreed. "The magistrate cannot ignore attempted kidnapping, regardless of Hargrave's rank. We can move quickly now." "How quickly?" Eleanor asked. "A week, perhaps 2, before this reaches the House of Lords for formal proceedings." Quinton looked at her seriously. "You will need to testify, Miss Sutton. In person, before the Lords. Are you prepared for that?" Eleanor thought of standing before dozens of noblemen, recounting her abuse, facing their questions and potential disbelief. The idea terrified her. But she thought of Mary's mother, of Thomas's courage in coming forward, of Lady Vivian's determination to speak truth. "I am prepared," she said firmly. "I will tell them everything." Julian's eyes met hers across the room, pride evident in his expression. "Then we have him. Hargrave's world is about to come crashing down." The following days passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor worked with Quinton to refine her testimony, practicing answers to questions that might be asked. Lady Hartfield helped her select appropriate clothing for appearing before the Lords, ensuring she looked respectable and dignified rather than like the servant Hargrave had tried to make her. Julian was everywhere, coordinating with his men, exchanging letters with allies in London, ensuring every detail of their case was airtight. But he also made time for Eleanor, walking with her in the gardens each evening as the sun set over the Yorkshire hills. "How are you truly managing?" he asked one evening, as they paused beside a fountain. "I am frightened," Eleanor admitted, "but I am also angry, and that anger is stronger than the fear now." "Good. Anger can be fuel, if directed properly." Julian turned to face her. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. After the trial, after Hargrave is dealt with, you will need to decide what comes next for you, where you will live, what life you wish to build. I know. I have been trying not to think about it. The future feels impossible to imagine. I want you to know that whatever you choose, wherever you decide to go, you will have resources. The compensation from Hargrave's estate certainly, but also my support if you need it. You are not alone in this." Eleanor looked up at him, at this man who had saved her life, and asked nothing in return. "Julian, when you said before that you wanted to know me better when this was over, did you mean that?" "Every word." His voice was quiet but certain. "But Eleanor, I will not press you. You have been through trauma that will take time to heal from. You need space to discover who you are without fear or obligation dictating your choices." "What if I do not want space?" The words came out before Eleanor could stop them. "What if I already know that you are part of the future I want to build?" Julian's breath caught. "Eleanor, I am not confused or traumatized into thinking this," she interrupted. "Yes, you saved me. Yes, I am grateful. But that is not why I care for you. I care for you because you see me as a person, not a victim, because you make me feel strong instead of broken. Because when I imagine tomorrow and the day after and all the days beyond, I want you in them." For a long moment, Julian simply looked at her. Then he reached out and cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Eleanor breathed. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. Then Julian's arms came around her, and Eleanor pressed closer, feeling safe and wanted in a way she had never experienced. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Julian said, the words simple and sure. "I think I have since that night on the roof, when you took my hand and chose to fight instead of giving up." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I love you too. I did not think I could feel this way, after everything. But you made me believe in more than just survival." They stood together as darkness fell over North Vale, holding each other against the world. Tomorrow would bring more preparation for the trial, more strategy and legal maneuvering. But tonight, Eleanor allowed herself simply to feel. To feel love, hope, and the solid certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. A commotion from the house drew their attention. They turned to see Quinton hurrying across the lawn, his expression urgent. "News from London," he called as he approached. "Hargrave has made a move. He has petitioned for your immediate return to his custody, claiming you are mentally unstable and a danger to yourself." Eleanor felt ice flood through her veins. "He is using what I tried to do on the roof against me. He is desperate," Julian said, his jaw tight. "This is the act of a man who knows he is losing." "Quinton, what grounds does he claim? That you are his legal ward, responsible for debts, and that you attempted self-harm while in his care. He is trying to paint himself as the concerned guardian, and you as unreliable." "But that is a lie," Eleanor protested. "He locked me in a cellar. He drove me to that roof. We know that. Now we need to make certain the Lords know it too." Julian's arm tightened around Eleanor's waist. "We moved the timeline up. Quinton, can we be ready to present our case within 3 days? It will be rushed, but yes, everything is essentially prepared." Quinton looked at Eleanor. "But you must be ready, Miss Sutton. Hargrave will attack your character, your stability. You must stand firm against that." Eleanor thought of the girl in the cellar, the one who had given up hope. Then she thought of who she had become since Julian found her on that roof. She had survived. She had found her strength. She would not let Hargrave take that from her now. "I am ready," she said. "Let him come. Let him try to break me again. He will find I am not so easily broken anymore." The House of Lords chamber was far more intimidating than Eleanor had imagined. She stood in a small antechamber with Julian, Quinton, and Lady Hartfield, listening to the murmur of voices beyond the heavy doors. Dozens of the most powerful men in England waited inside, ready to judge her testimony and decide Hargrave's fate. "You do not have to do this," Julian said quietly, taking her hand. "We have other witnesses. If standing before them is too much—" "No," Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "I need to do this. Not just for justice, but for myself. I will not let him silence me anymore." The doors opened, and a clerk gestured them forward. Eleanor walked into the chamber with her head high, refusing to let her fear show. The room was circular, with rows of seats rising in tiers around a central floor. Lords in their formal robes filled the benches, their faces ranging from curious to skeptical, to openly hostile. And there, seated among his peers, was Earl Vincent Hargrave. He looked older than Eleanor remembered, his face drawn and pale, but his eyes burned with fury when they locked on her, and she saw the promise of vengeance in them. She forced herself to look away, to focus instead on the Lord Chancellor who would oversee these proceedings. "Miss Eleanor Sutton," the Lord Chancellor intoned, "you have brought serious charges against Earl Hargrave. You will now present your testimony under oath." Eleanor stepped forward to the witness stand, her legs steadier than she had hoped. She placed her hand on the Bible offered to her and swore to tell the truth. Then she began to speak. She told them everything, about her father's death and the debts she had inherited, about Hargrave purchasing those debts and demanding she work as a servant in his household, about 5 years of brutal labour, of being locked in the cellar, of meals withheld as punishment. She spoke clearly and precisely, the way Quinton had taught her, citing specific dates and incidents. "You claim these debts were falsified," one lord interrupted. But Earl Hargrave has presented documents showing legitimate loans. Those documents are forgeries, my lord. Quinton stood and approached with a portfolio. We have obtained the original debt agreements from the creditors. The amounts do not match what the Earl claimed. He altered the figures to nearly double what was actually owed. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Quinton laid out the documents side by side on a table visible to all, pointing out the discrepancies. Several lords leaned forward to examine them more closely. "This is outrageous," Hargrave burst out, half rising from his seat. "These are clearly the forgeries, created to defame me. I purchased those debts in good faith." "You purchased them and then manipulated them," Julian said, his voice cutting across the chamber. "And that is only one of your crimes, Hargrave. Shall we discuss the servants who disappeared from your employ? The girl who allegedly fell to her death down your stairs?" "Accidents happen," Hargrave said coldly. "Servants come and go. You cannot prove—" "Thomas Bennet," the Lord Chancellor called. "Step forward." Thomas entered the chamber, visibly terrified but resolute. He had spent days preparing for this moment, and now he stood before the assembled lords and began to speak. He confirmed Eleanor's account of her treatment. He described the conditions of her confinement. And then he spoke of Mary. "I saw it happen, my lords," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "Miss Mary Williams did not fall. The Earl pushed her during an argument. She struck her head on the stone steps and died nearly instantly. The Earl paid the magistrate to rule it an accident and paid Mary's family to accept that ruling without question." The chamber erupted in voices. The Lord Chancellor called for order, pounding his gavel. Hargrave was on his feet now, his face red with rage. "This man is lying. He is my servant, bought and paid for by the Duke to give false testimony." "I have never received a penny from the Duke," Thomas said firmly. "I came forward because I could no longer live with what I witnessed, because I am tired of being afraid." "Lady Vivian Hargrave," the Lord Chancellor called. Eleanor watched as Lady Vivian entered, elegant and composed despite the tension in the room. She took her oath and turned to face the assembly with her chin raised. "My lords, I have been married to Vincent Hargrave for 18 years. In that time, I have witnessed his cruelty firsthand. He is a man who takes pleasure in exercising power over those weaker than himself. He has threatened me, isolated me, and once attempted to have me declared insane when I sought to leave him." Her voice was steady, unflinching. "The charges Miss Sutton brings are entirely consistent with the man I know him to be." "You are my wife," Hargrave snarled. "You are bound to support me, not undermine me with lies." "I am bound by marriage, not by loyalty to a monster," Vivian shot back. "You have proven yourself unworthy of either my support or my silence." More witnesses followed. Mary's mother, grief-stricken but determined, spoke of the letters her daughter had sent before her death, letters filled with fear of the Earl. A former magistrate, now retired and beyond Hargrave's influence, admitted under questioning that he had been paid to overlook irregularities at Hargrave Manor. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an undeniable picture of systematic abuse and corruption. Finally, the Lord Chancellor turned to Eleanor. "Miss Sutton, the Earl has claimed that you attempted to take your own life while in his care, suggesting mental instability. How do you respond to this?" Eleanor took a deep breath. This was the moment she had dreaded, the one where her darkest hour would be exposed and judged. But she had promised herself she would not hide from the truth. "It is true, my lord. After 5 years of abuse, after being told repeatedly that I was worthless and that my suffering would never end, I climbed to a roof and considered ending my life." Her voice wavered but held. "But that desperation was not madness. It was the natural result of prolonged cruelty and complete hopelessness. The Earl drove me to that edge as surely as if he had pushed me himself. And yet you chose not to jump," another lord observed. "Because the Duke of North Vale found me and reminded me that I had worth, that my life mattered, that there might be justice if I was brave enough to seek it." Eleanor's eyes found Julian in the gallery. "He saved my life, not through force, but through compassion and truth." The Lord Chancellor studied her for a long moment. "Earl Hargrave claims he was attempting to recover you as his legal ward when his men attacked Lady Hartfield's residence. He maintains this was a lawful act. There was nothing lawful about sending 6 armed men to kidnap a woman in the middle of the night, Julian said, standing. Multiple witnesses can attest to the violence of that attempt. The Earl was not exercising guardianship, my lords. He was attempting to silence someone who could expose his crimes. Crimes you have invented! Hargrave shouted. This is a conspiracy orchestrated by the Duke because he wishes to take over my lands. He seduced this girl into making false accusations. Enough! The Lord Chancellor's voice cracked like a whip. Earl Hargrave, you will contain yourself or be removed from this chamber. We have heard extensive testimony supported by documentary evidence. The charges against you are severe and the evidence compelling. The proceedings continued for another hour as various lords questioned the witnesses and examined the documents. Eleanor answered every question put to her, refusing to be shaken even when some lords clearly doubted her account. She could feel Hargrave's hatred radiating from across the chamber, but she no longer feared it. She had faced him and survived. Nothing he could do now would break her. Finally, the Lord Chancellor called for a recess to allow the lords to deliberate. Eleanor was led back to the antechamber, where Lady Hartfield embraced her tightly. You were magnificent, the older woman said. So brave, so clear. They must believe you. Some of them do, Quinton said, entering behind them. But others are reluctant to move against an earl without absolute certainty. We need something more, something that removes all doubt. What more can we provide? Julian asked, frustration evident in his voice. We have testimony, documents, multiple witnesses. We need to show them the man himself, Eleanor said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Hargrave's greatest weapon has always been his respectability, the facade of nobility he wears. But I have seen what lies beneath that facade. If we can make him show his true nature before the lords. How? Quinton asked. Eleanor thought of 5 years of watching the Earl, of learning his patterns and his triggers. He cannot stand to be contradicted or questioned. His pride is enormous. If someone challenges him directly, publicly, he will lash out. He cannot help himself. Julian's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You want to provoke him. I want to give him enough rope to hang himself with. Eleanor looked around at the others. Let me testify again. Let me confront him directly. He will reveal himself. I am certain of it. It is dangerous, Lady Hartfield protested. If he becomes violent, there are guards in that chamber and dozens of witnesses. He cannot hurt me there. Eleanor's voice was firm. But he can destroy himself if given the opportunity. Quinton and Julian exchanged glances. Finally, Julian nodded. We will request additional testimony. But Eleanor, if at any point you feel unsafe, I will be fine, she assured him. Trust me. When the proceedings reconvened, Quinton petitioned for Miss Sutton to be allowed to address the Earl directly. The Lord Chancellor hesitated, but ultimately agreed, curious to see what would transpire. Eleanor stood and walked to the centre of the chamber, positioning herself where she could face Hargrave directly. He stared at her with undisguised loathing. Earl Hargrave, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. You have claimed that I am mentally unstable, that you were acting as a concerned guardian. If that is true, can you explain why you kept me locked in a cellar during visits from respectable guests? You were a servant being disciplined for... I was a viscount's daughter being hidden away like something shameful. Why was that necessary if your treatment of me was proper and legal? Hargrave's face reddened. You were disobedient and required... I was starved and beaten. Can you deny that, under oath, before these lords? You were never beaten. Then explain the scars on my hands and back, which Dr. Whitmore documented and photographed. Eleanor held up her hands, showing the marks that labour had left. Explain how a servant doing honest work receives injuries like these. Accidents of work, Hargrave ground out. You were clumsy. I was 21 years old when I entered your service. By your own accounting, I owed £300 in debts. At a generous wage for a servant of £60 per year, even with room and board deducted, those debts should have been satisfied within 5 years at most. Yet you claimed I still owed you money when I escaped. Can you explain that arithmetic, my lord? Hargrave rose from his seat, his hands clenched into fists. You are twisting facts, you manipulative little... I am stating simple arithmetic. Perhaps you could enlighten us all as to where my calculations are wrong. You owed what I said you owed. You will pay what I demand. Hargrave was shouting now, his composure shattered. You are nothing, do you understand? Nothing. A debtor, a servant, property to be used as I see fit. The chamber exploded in shocked voices. Several lords were on their feet, calling for order. Hargrave seemed to realize what he had said, his face going from red to white in an instant. I meant, that is not, he stammered. You meant exactly what you said, Eleanor replied calmly. That you see people as property, that you believe your title gives you the right to abuse and exploit those beneath you. That is who you truly are, Earl Hargrave. Not the respectable nobleman you pretend to be, but a cruel man who takes pleasure in others' suffering. Hargrave lunged toward her, murder in his eyes. Guards seized him immediately, dragging him back as he fought against them, screaming obscenities at Eleanor that made several lords cover their ears in shock. The Lord Chancellor pounded his gavel repeatedly. Remove Earl Hargrave from this chamber. He has proven himself unworthy of the dignity of these proceedings. As guards hauled the still struggling Hargrave away, Eleanor remained standing in the centre of the chamber, her heart pounding but her head high. She had done it. She had made him show his true face to everyone who mattered. The deliberation after that was swift. The lords emerged within the hour with their decision. Earl Vincent Hargrave was stripped of his title and all privileges thereof. His estates were forfeit, to be sold with proceeds distributed to his victims. He would face criminal trial for fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and murder. Justice, finally, had come for the man who thought himself above it. Eleanor stood beside Julian as the verdict was read, her hand in his, and felt something lift from her chest that had weighed there for 5 years. She was free, truly, finally free. 6 months had passed since the trial that brought down Earl Vincent Hargrave. Eleanor stood in the garden at Northvale Estate, watching the first snow of winter dust the Yorkshire hills with white. The world looked clean, new, as if nature itself had decided to turn a fresh page. Behind her, the house bustled with preparations. Lady Hartfield directed servants with her usual efficiency, ensuring every detail was perfect. Quinton had arrived from London the previous evening, bringing final documents that required Eleanor's signature, and Julian was somewhere inside, likely in his study, handling the endless correspondence that came with managing his estates. Eleanor pulled her cloak tighter and breathed in the crisp air. 6 months. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago that she had stood on that roof, prepared to end everything. Other times, the memories felt so close she could almost touch them. But the nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, Julian was there to hold her until she found peace again. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her turn. Thomas approached, looking healthier than she had ever seen him. After the trial, Julian had offered him employment at North Vale, and Thomas had accepted gratefully. He had proven himself invaluable, managing the household staff with quiet competence. Miss Sutton, he said, bowing slightly. His Grace asked me to tell you that the solicitor has arrived with the final papers regarding the Hargrave estate settlement. Thank you, Thomas. Eleanor smiled at him. And please, you may simply call me Eleanor when we are not in company. You are not my servant here. Thomas's eyes crinkled with warmth. Old habits, miss. But I will try to remember. They walked back to the house together. Inside, warmth and light greeted them, so different from the cold darkness of Hargrave Manor. Eleanor would never take such simple comforts for granted again. The solicitor waited in Julian's study, a thin man with spectacles and an air of perpetual concern. He stood when Eleanor entered, followed by Julian and Quinton. Miss Sutton, if you will review these documents and sign where indicated, the settlement will be finalised. The solicitor spread papers across Julian's desk. The sale of Hargrave's properties has been completed. After debts and legal fees, the remaining sum comes to £42,000. Of that, you are entitled to £15,000 as primary victim and heir to the falsified debts. Eleanor stared at the figure. £15,000. More money than her father had ever possessed. More than she could have imagined having. It felt unreal. The remainder has been distributed to the families of Mary Williams and Alice Fletcher, as well as smaller sums to other servants who provided testimony, the solicitor continued. Earl Hargrave himself has been transported to a prison where he will serve 20 years for his crimes. 20 years! The man who had stolen 5 years of her life would lose 20 of his own. Eleanor felt no joy in it, only a quiet sense that balance had been restored. She signed the documents carefully, her hand steady. When the solicitor departed, she remained standing by the desk, looking down at the bank draft that represented her compensation. "What will you do with it?" Quinton asked gently. "Such a sum could purchase a home, fund investments, ensure your security for life. I have been thinking about that." Eleanor looked up at the two brothers who had become so important to her. "Lady Hartfield and I have been corresponding with other women, wives and daughters of noblemen, who find themselves trapped in situations similar to what I endured. There are more than I ever imagined. Women with nowhere to turn, no resources, no protection from abusive husbands or fathers or guardians. You wish to help them," Julian said. It was not a question. "I wish to create something that can help them. A foundation, perhaps, that provides legal assistance and safe housing for women escaping abuse. Somewhere they can go when they have nowhere else." Eleanor's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I cannot give back the years that were stolen from me, but I can ensure other women do not lose their years the same way." Quinton smiled. "That is a worthy use of the funds. I would be honored to help establish such a foundation legally. And I suspect I could find other lawyers willing to donate their time to the cause." "As could I," Julian added. "Properties could be purchased or donated to serve as safe houses. Staff employed to protect and assist the women who seek help." He moved to stand beside Eleanor. "You would do remarkable good with this." "We would do remarkable good," Eleanor corrected. "I cannot do this alone. I will need help, advice, resources beyond what I possess." "Then you shall have them," Lady Hartfield said from the doorway. She entered the study with her usual grace. "I have already begun compiling a list of potential donors and supporters. Several ladies of my acquaintance are quite eager to contribute to such a cause." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears. "Thank you. All of you. I could never have imagined 6 months ago that I would be standing here planning something like this." "6 months ago you were fighting just to survive," Julian said quietly. "Now you are fighting to help others do the same. That is who you have always been, Eleanor. Strong, compassionate, determined. Hargrave tried to break those qualities in you, but he failed." That evening, Eleanor found herself alone in the library, staring into the fire. The house had grown quiet as everyone retired to prepare for dinner. She thought of her father, wondering what he would think of the woman she had become. Would he be proud? Or disappointed that she had endured so much? He would be proud. Eleanor turned to find Julian in the doorway. He crossed the room to sit beside her. "How did you know what I was thinking?" she asked. "Because I know you. And I know that you wonder sometimes if you could have done things differently. If you could have escaped sooner or fought harder." Julian took her hand. "But Eleanor, you survived. You kept yourself alive through 5 years of hell. And when the opportunity came to seek justice, you took it. Your father would be immensely proud of that. I hope so." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. "I wish he could have known you. I think you would have liked each other." "I wish that too." Julian was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, there is something I need to ask you. Something I have been waiting to ask until you had time to heal. To discover who you wish to be without fear dictating your choices." Eleanor lifted her head to look at him. "What is it?" Julian stood and drew her to her feet. Then, to her shock, he lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "6 months ago, I found you on a roof and convinced you to take my hand. You have held that hand every day since, through trials and testimony and the slow work of healing. You have become the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple band with a single sapphire that matched her eyes. Eleanor Sutton, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment might come, had felt it approaching in the way Julian looked at her, the way his touch lingered. But now that it was here, she felt overwhelmed by the enormity of it. Julian, are you certain? I am not who I was before Hargrave. I have scars, nightmares. There are days when I struggle simply to believe I deserve happiness. I am absolutely certain. Julian's voice was firm. You are exactly who I want, scars and nightmares and struggles included. I love you, Eleanor. Not the girl you were before, not some idealized version of who you might become, but you as you are, right now. Imperfect, healing, and so very strong. Eleanor thought of everything they had been through together. The nights he had held her through nightmares. The way he had fought for her when she had no strength to fight for herself. The love in his eyes every time he looked at her. A love that asked for nothing but to be allowed to exist. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with joy. Yes, Julian, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. When he kissed her, Eleanor felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. This was not a fairy tale ending where the broken girl was saved by the prince. This was two people who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light together. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small chapel at North Vale. It was intimate, attended only by those who truly mattered. Lady Hartfield wept happily throughout the ceremony. Quinton served as best man, his usual solemnity cracking into genuine joy. Thomas and the North Vale staff lined the pews, beaming with pride. Lady Vivian Hargrave attended as well, having become a friend to Eleanor in the months since the trial. She had obtained her legal separation and now lived independently, working alongside Eleanor to establish the foundation for abused women. As Eleanor walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk, she thought of all the paths that had led her to this moment. The grief of losing her father, the horror of Hargrave Manor, the desperation of that night on the roof. Each terrible thing had brought her here, to Julian, to purpose, to a life she had thought lost forever. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Julian kissed her tenderly, and Eleanor knew she was exactly where she belonged. 2 years later, Eleanor stood once again in the gardens at North Vale, but this time she held a child in her arms. Her son, Henry, named for her father, gazed up at her with curious blue eyes. He was 6 months old, healthy and happy, and Eleanor loved him with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. Julian approached across the lawn, accompanied by a young woman Eleanor did not recognize. The woman looked nervous, her clothes worn, and her eyes haunted in a way Eleanor knew all too well. "Eleanor, this is Margaret Cole," Julian said gently. "She arrived this morning, seeking help from the foundation. I thought you might wish to speak with her." Eleanor handed Henry to Julian and turned her full attention to Margaret. She saw herself in this woman's face, saw the fear and desperation she remembered so well. "You are safe here," Eleanor said softly. "Whatever you have endured, whatever you are fleeing, you are safe now. We will help you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "They said you would understand, that you had been through something similar." "I have. And I survived, Margaret. So will you." Eleanor took the younger woman's hand. "Come inside. Let us talk about what happens next." As they walked toward the house, Julian falling into step beside them, with Henry gurgling contentedly in his arms, Eleanor felt profound gratitude. Not for the suffering she had endured, but for the strength it had revealed in her, for the life she had built from the ashes of despair. That evening, after Margaret had been settled in one of the foundation's safe houses and Henry had been put to bed, Eleanor and Julian sat together on the terrace overlooking the grounds. The sun set over the Yorkshire hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Do you ever think about that night?" Julian asked quietly. "The night I found you on the roof?" "Every day," Eleanor admitted, but not with regret anymore. "I think about how close I came to losing all of this, to never knowing you, never having Henry, never helping women like Margaret." She leaned against him. "I think about how much I would have missed. I think about it too. about how easily I could have looked away, dismissed what I saw, returned to my comfortable life without involving myself in your troubles. Julian's arm tightened around her. I am grateful every day that I did not. Eleanor turned to look at him. This man who had saved her life by reminding her it was worth saving. Julian, do you remember what you said to me that night? That my life was worth more than any debt I thought I owed. I remember. You were right. My life was worth more, is worth more. And every day I wake up in this beautiful place, with you beside me and our son sleeping peacefully, and women like Margaret finding safety through our foundation, I feel that worth. I feel the value of surviving, of fighting, of refusing to let darkness win. You inspire me, Julian said simply. Every single day, you inspire me. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell over North Vale. Somewhere in the house, Henry made small sleeping sounds. In London, the Foundation's offices would open tomorrow to help another woman escape abuse. In a prison far away, Vincent Hargrave served his sentence, his power broken forever. And here, in this moment, Eleanor Merrick, Duchess of North Vale, formerly Eleanor Sutton, once a prisoner who had nearly ended her own life, felt completely, perfectly at peace. She had survived. More than that, she had triumphed, and in doing so, she had learned the most important lesson of all, that healing was possible, that love could flourish even in soil poisoned by cruelty, and that the strongest chains were not made of iron, but of the belief that escape was impossible. She had broken those chains, and now she spent her life helping others do the same. The story of the Duke who found a woman in a cellar and burned down the manor to set her free became something of a legend in certain circles. But those who knew the truth understood that the real story was more complex and more beautiful. It was the story of a woman who saved herself by choosing to accept help when it was offered, of a man who understood that true nobility meant fighting for those who could not fight for themselves, of two people who found each other in darkness and built a life filled with light. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings, Eleanor walked past the empty field where Hargrave Manor had once stood, she did so without fear or grief. She looked at that barren ground and saw not what had been taken from her, but everything she had gained: freedom, purpose, love, life itself. She had been a prisoner, yes, but she was a prisoner no longer. She was free in every way that mattered, and she would spend the rest of her days ensuring that others could find that same freedom, that same hope, that same unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today. That was her promise, her purpose, her triumph. And it was enough. The end.